"Mom, starting with your next paycheck, we're going to transfer all your money to my account." Those were the words my son Lawrence said to me that Thursday afternoon while he was drinking coffee in my kitchen. As if he was proposing something completely normal, as if he was doing me a favor, as if I were incapable of managing my own money at 62 years old. I stared at him. I didn't say anything for a few seconds. I just looked into his eyes, searching for something that would explain why my own son, the boy I raised alone, who I fed with the sweat of my brow, was asking for total access to my bank account. But I didn't find anything. I just saw that calm smile, that confidence of someone who knows they're in control. So I took a deep breath and told him yes, that it seemed fine to me, that I trusted him. Lawrence's smile widened. He stood up, gave me a quick mechanical kiss on the forehead, one of those kisses that don't mean anything, and told me it was for the best. He said I wouldn't have to worry about a thing, that he would take care of everything, that it was for my own good. For my own good. Those words hung in the air after he left my house. That same night, like every Friday, Lawrence came back, but he didn't come alone. He arrived with his wife, as he always did. He came expecting me to have dinner ready, expecting the table to be set, expecting there to be hot, free food, as there had been every Friday for the past 3 years. I heard them arrive. I heard their footsteps at the front door. I heard the key I had given him turning in the lock. I heard the door open. And then I heard the scream. It was a high-pitched, desperate scream. The scream of someone who has just seen something they didn't expect to see. The scream of someone who just realized that things weren't going to be the way they thought. I stayed seated in my chair in the empty kitchen in the empty house, listening to that scream echo against the walls. I didn't move. I didn't go to see what was happening. I already knew what was happening. Lawrence came running into the kitchen. His face was pale, his eyes wide. His wife came in behind him with the same expression of shock and disbelief. "Mom!" Lawrence yelled. "Mom, what did you do? Where is everything? Where's the furniture? Where's the TV? Where is everything that was here?" I looked at him calmly, with a calmness I didn't even know I had. And I told him in the softest voice I could find that I had sold some things, that I needed the money, that after all, if he was going to be managing my finances, I needed to make sure I had some cash first. His face changed from pale to red, from shock to fury. He took a step toward me, and for the first time in my life, I saw my son for what he really was. Not as the boy I had raised. Not as the young man I had helped build his life, but as a stranger, as someone who was looking at me with contempt, with rage, with something that looked dangerously like hatred. "You're crazy," he said. "You're completely crazy. How could you sell everything without asking me? Now, what are we going to do when we come over? How are we going to be comfortable here?" That was the sentence that changed everything. How are we going to be comfortable here? Not how are you going to be comfortable, Mom? He wasn't worried about how this affected me, but how it was going to affect them, as if my house were their extension, as if my things existed for their convenience. His wife came closer then. She looked at me with those eyes that had always seemed cold and calculating. And she said something I'll never forget. She said I was being selfish, that I was only thinking about myself, that they came every week to keep me company, to make sure I was okay, and that this was how I repaid them. Selfish me. The woman who had worked double shifts for years so that Lawrence could go to college. The woman who had given up on starting a new life after his father left us because I didn't want my son to grow up with a stepfather. The woman who had lived in small apartments, who had worn old clothes, who had eaten the bare minimum so he could have everything he needed. Selfish. Lawrence just stood there looking at me as if I were a problem he needed to solve. And then he said something that broke me in two. He said maybe it had been a mistake to suggest the bank account to me, that maybe I wasn't in a condition to make good decisions, that maybe I needed more help than he thought. More help, as if I were a burden, as if I were an incapable old woman who needed to be controlled. I got up from my chair, then I looked at them both, and I told them in a voice that came out stronger than I expected, that dinner wasn't ready, that there was no dinner, that if they were hungry, they could go eat somewhere else. The silence that followed was thick and heavy. Lawrence looked at me as if he couldn't believe what he had just heard. His wife let out a dry, bitter laugh and muttered something about respect and gratitude. And then Lawrence said the sentence, the sentence I still hear in my head when I close my eyes at night. He said with a coldness I'd never heard from him before that I should be careful that a woman my age alone without family who truly cared about her could end up in a very bad place, that he was the only thing I had, that I should remember that before I did something stupid they left, then they stormed out of my house slamming doors, leaving a trail of rage and veiled threats. I heard them get into their car. I heard the engine start. I heard them drive away. And I stood there in my empty kitchen in my empty house, feeling something inside me break for good. But what I felt wasn't sadness. It wasn't despair. It was something different. It was clarity. It was the absolute certainty that my son didn't love me. That maybe he had never loved me. That I was just a resource to him, a source of money, food, and comfort. I sat back down in my chair. I looked at the bare walls of my living room. I looked at the empty spaces where there had once been furniture that I had bought with my labor, with my effort. And for the first time in a very long time, I smiled. Because Lawrence didn't know something. He didn't know that I hadn't sold the furniture for money. I had sold it to send a message, to see how he would react, to confirm what I already suspected deep down in my heart. And he had reacted exactly as I expected, with rage, with indignation, with the attitude of someone who feels they have a right to another person's things. That night, as I sat in the darkness of my empty house, I made a decision. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to do something much more powerful. I was going to observe. I was going to wait. I was going to let Lawrence believe he had one. And then, when he least expected it, when he was most confident, most sure of his control over me, I was going to show him who Patricia Mendes really was. Not the submissive mother he thought he knew, but the woman who had survived a broken marriage, poverty, and years of hard work. The woman who knew exactly how to protect herself, the woman he should never have underestimated. There was a time when I believed that being a mother was enough. That the love I gave would be returned naturally as if it were a universal law. That the sacrifices I made every day would build something solid, something unbreakable between my son and me. How wrong I was. Lawrence was born on a stormy night 34 years ago. His father, the man who had promised me a life together, left when the boy was barely 2 years old. He said he wasn't ready to be a dad, that he needed to find himself, that I would understand someday. I never understood. But I also didn't wait for him to come back. I was left alone with a small child, a 2-bedroom apartment that I could barely afford, and a secretary job that paid $800 a month. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. So, I got a second job cleaning offices at night. I would leave Lawrence with my neighbor, an elderly woman who charged me $50 a week to watch him. I worked from 7 o'clock in the morning until 6 o'clock in the evening at the office. I would come home, feed Lawrence, bathe him, and put him to bed. And then I would leave again at 9 at night to clean buildings until 2 o'clock in the morning. I slept 4 hours, and then I would start all over again. I did that for years. For so many years, I lost count. I remember that Lawrence always wanted the brand name sneakers that the other kids at school wore. They cost $120. I earned $1,200 a month from both jobs. $120 was almost all the money I had for food for 2 weeks, but I bought them for him because I didn't want my son to feel less than anyone else, because I wanted him to know that his mother would do anything for him. I ate rice and beans for an entire month to be able to pay for those sneakers. When Lawrence turned 18, he wanted to go to college, a private university that cost $15,000 a year. I didn't have that money. I didn't even have a tenth of that money. But I went to the bank and took out a loan. I went into debt for 4 full years of education that I ended up paying off for 10 years after. 10 years of paying a loan so that my son could have a college degree. He graduated. He got a good job. He was making $3,000 a month, double what I was making after 30 years of work. And I was happy. I thought that he could finally build his life, that I had finally done my job as a mother well. But Lawrence didn't leave my house right away. He said he wanted to save money, that he wanted to have a solid foundation before living on his own. I told him, of course, that my house was his house, that he could stay as long as he needed. He stayed 5 more years. 5 years in which I was still working my 2 jobs. 5 years in which I paid the rent. I paid for the food. I paid for the utilities. 5 years in which Lawrence saved every single cent of his salary because he didn't have to pay for anything. When he finally left, it wasn't to rent an apartment. It was to buy a house, a $200,000 house that he was able to pay for in cash because he had saved all his money during those 5 years of living for free at my house. I was proud. I told him I was proud. And I was. I thought I had done the right thing by helping him. I thought that now that he had his own house, maybe he could help me. Maybe I could work less. Maybe I could rest a little. But that never happened. Lawrence got married 2 years after he moved out. His wife was an elegant woman, one of those who always dresses well, who always has perfect nails, who always speaks with that tone of voice that sounds polite but hides disdain. From the beginning, I noticed that she looked at me differently, as if I were something inferior, as if she didn't understand why Lawrence came from where he came from. At the wedding, which cost $30,000, I sat at a table in the back, not at the main table with the family. Lawrence explained that it was because there were a lot of important people, clients from his job, and that they needed those tables for them. I said I understood. I smiled in the pictures. I danced when they asked me to. And I went home alone that night, feeling strangely empty. After the wedding, Lawrence's visits became less frequent. Before, he would come to see me 2 or 3 times a week. After he got married, he came once every 2 weeks, then once a month, always in a hurry, always looking at his phone, always with some excuse to leave early. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to be the annoying mother, the mother who complains, the mother who doesn't understand that her son has his own life now. But then they started coming on Friday nights, always at dinner time, always without notice, always expecting me to have food ready. At first, I was happy. I thought that Lawrence finally wanted to spend time with me, that he finally missed me, so I would cook his favorite dishes. I would set the table nicely. I would buy dessert. But I noticed something. I noticed that Lawrence never came alone. He always brought his wife. And I noticed that they never came to talk. They came to eat. They would arrive, sit down, eat, and leave. Sometimes they would stay an hour, sometimes less. I also noticed that they never brought anything, never a bottle of wine, never a dessert, never any money to help with the food, nothing. One night after they left, I counted how much I had spent on dinner. $45. $45 that I didn't have to spare. $45 that meant I would have to work extra hours to make up for it. And I realized something. I realized that to Lawrence, I had become a service, a free restaurant, a place where he could come to eat without paying, without even really thanking me. I started to notice other things too. I noticed that when I asked him for help with something, he always had excuses. That when I needed a ride to the doctor because my car was broken, he was always busy. That when I mentioned my refrigerator was making strange noises and that I was afraid it would break down soon, he told me to buy a new one, as if I had $500 saved up for emergencies. I didn't have it. I barely had enough to get to the end of the month. But what hurt the most was my birthday, my 60th birthday. Lawrence arrived 2 hours late without a gift, without a card, with an excuse about traffic. He stayed for 20 minutes. He ate the cake that I had bought for myself because I didn't want to spend it alone. And he left. I cried that night. I cried like I hadn't cried in years because I finally understood something that I had been denying for a long time. I understood that to my son I was no longer important, that I was just a resource, something that was there available, waiting to be used when he needed it. And the worst part was that I had allowed it. I had established that pattern. I had never asked him for anything. I had never told him that I felt used. I had never told him that I needed more from him than just 20-minute visits and Friday night dinners because I was afraid. Afraid that if I complained, if I asked, if I demanded, he would disappear completely. And the idea of losing my son, even this son who barely saw me, terrified me more than anything else. So I continued to be the convenient mother, the silent mother, the mother who was always there, who always had the door open, who never caused problems until that Thursday afternoon, until Lawrence told me he wanted to manage my money. And something inside me, something that had been asleep for years, woke up. A small but clear voice that told me this wasn't right, that this was the beginning of something worse. But even then, even with that voice whispering in my head, I told him yes. Because I still had hope. I still wanted to believe that my son loved me, that he would protect me, that he would do the right thing. How foolish I was. The following Monday, Lawrence came to my house with papers. Lots of papers. He spread them out on the kitchen table with that smile that now seemed different to me, less warm, more calculating. "Mom, this is simple," he told me. "I just need you to sign here, here, and here. They're the documents so I can have access to your account, so I can transfer your paycheck automatically every month. That way, I'll take care of paying your bills, of managing everything. You won't have to worry about a thing." I looked at the papers. They were bank forms, authorization forms. I read the fine print, the stuff people usually ignore. And I saw something that chilled me to the bone. It wasn't just access to my account. It was complete power. It was the authority to make transfers, to close accounts, to make financial decisions on my behalf. "Lawrence, this says that you would have total control over my money," I told him. He nodded as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "Yes, Mom. This way it's easier. That way, I can manage everything without having to ask you for authorizations every time. It's for practicality." Practicality? That word echoed in my head. Practicality for who? I asked myself, but I didn't say it out loud. I took the pen he offered me. I held it in my hand. And for a moment, I was about to sign. I was about to hand over everything because that's what I had always done. Trust. Hand over. But then I remembered Friday night. I remembered his face full of fury when he saw the empty house. I remembered his words. I remembered how he had threatened me, even though he probably didn't even realize that was a threat. I put the pen down on the table. "You know what, Lawrence? Give me a few days to think about it. I want to read everything carefully. I want to be sure." His expression changed just for a second. Just a flash of irritation that crossed his face before he smiled again. "Mom, there's nothing to think about. It's simple but fine. If you want to take a few days, that's okay." He left then, but he left the papers as if he assumed I would end up signing them anyway. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stayed up looking at those papers on the kitchen table. And something inside me told me that this wasn't for my own good, that this was the beginning of something I couldn't undo once it started. The next day I went to the bank. I went early before my job. I asked the teller to check my account to show me all the transaction from the last 6 months. She printed the papers. They were several pages. I checked them carefully line by line. And then I saw it. I saw it and felt the floor move beneath my feet. There was a withdrawal that I hadn't made. A withdrawal of $1,200 from 3 months ago. $1,200 that had left my account and that I didn't remember taking out. I asked the teller if I could see more details. She checked on her computer and she told me something that took my breath away. She told me that the withdrawal had been made at a branch on the other side of town with my debit card, but I had never been to that branch and my card was in my purse. It had always been in my purse except for one time. I remembered that 3 months ago Lawrence had come to visit me. I was in the shower when he arrived. I yelled for him to come in that the door was open. When I came out, he was in the living room waiting for me. We sat down and talked and at some point I went to the kitchen to make coffee. My purse was in my handbag. My handbag was in the living room with Lawrence. I felt nauseous. I felt like the whole world was tilting in a strange way because this could only mean one thing. It meant that my son had taken my card. He had memorized or photographed the numbers and he had taken money from my account without my permission. I asked the bank teller if there was any way to know exactly what had happened with that withdrawal. She told me I needed to file a formal claim that the bank would investigate, that it could take several weeks. I told her I would think about it and I left the bank feeling like I no longer knew my own son. But I didn't file the claim. Not yet. Because I needed to be sure. I needed to know if this had been just one time or if there were more. The next few days I spent checking everything, every paper I had in my house, every document, every old bank statement that I had saved in a box in my closet. And I found more things. I found that 2 years ago when I was in the hospital for pneumonia, someone had used my health insurance for consultations that I hadn't made. Consultations at clinics I didn't know about. Consultations that had exhausted my annual coverage, which was why I had had to pay out of my own pocket for some medications that year. I also found that there was a credit card in my name that I didn't remember applying for. A card with a balance of $3,000. $3,000 in purchases that I hadn't made at stores I had never been in. I called the credit card bank. I asked them when the account had been opened. They told me it was 18 months ago. I asked them if they could tell me where the purchases had been made. They gave me a list. Hardware stores, electronic stores, home furniture stores. Lawrence had bought a house 2 years ago. Lawrence had renovated that house, and apparently Lawrence had used my credit to do it. I sat on the floor of my bedroom, surrounded by papers, feeling like everything I had believed about my life was falling apart. It wasn't just the money. It was the betrayal. It was knowing that my son had been stealing from me for years, that he had seen me as an unlimited source of resources, that he had never intended to take care of me or protect me. I cried. I cried until I had no more tears. And then I wiped my face, gathered all the papers, and made a decision. I wasn't going to confront him yet. I wasn't going to yell at him or complain because I knew that if I did, he would deny everything. He would say I was confused. He would say I was senile. He would say anything to make me doubt my own memory, my own sanity. No, I was going to be smarter than that. I was going to collect proof. I was going to document everything. I was going to build a case so solid that he couldn't deny it. And then only then would I act. That Friday, Lawrence came back as always at dinner time, as always, expecting me to have food ready. But this time, I had cooked something different. I had made his favorite dish. Chicken with sauce and rice. The same dish I used to make for him when he was a little boy and came home from school feeling sad. The dish that told him how much I loved him without needing words. He sat down at the table with his wife. They ate. They talked about superficial things. Work, the weather, the new movie they wanted to see. I watched them. I watched them as if I were seeing them for the first time. And I realized something. I realized that Lawrence ate my food with the same indifference with which he would eat a fast food burger. There was no gratitude in his eyes. There was no love. There was only the mechanical act of eating something for free. When they finished, Lawrence took out the bank papers again. He put them on the table right next to his empty plate. Mom, the days you asked for have passed. You've thought about it, right? Sign this and I'll take care of everything. I looked him straight in the eyes and I told him in the calmest voice I could find that I still wasn't sure that I needed more time. His wife scoffed. Patricia, this is ridiculous. Lawrence is just trying to help you. I don't understand why you're being so distrustful. Distrustful? She called me distrustful. And the saddest thing was that she was right, but not in the way she thought. Lawrence stood up. His expression was hard now. Without the mask of a smile. Mom, this is for your own good. You can't keep managing your finances alone. It's obvious. Look at how you sold the furniture without thinking. Look at the irrational decisions you're making. Irrational. Selling my own furniture in my own house was irrational. But stealing from me for years wasn't. I didn't say anything. I just held his gaze until he looked away. They left that night without saying goodbye. And I stayed seated in my kitchen, looking at those unsigned papers, knowing that the war had just begun. A silent war, a war that I had to win. Because if I lost, I wouldn't just lose my money. I would lose my dignity, my autonomy, my life. The days after that dinner became strange. Lawrence didn't call me again. He didn't visit me again. It was as if he had decided to punish me with his absence. As if he believed I would fall apart without him. That I would beg him to come back. That I would finally sign those papers just to get his attention. But I didn't fall apart. For the first time in years, the silence of my house didn't feel empty. It felt full of something different. It felt full of clarity. I spent those days going through every detail of my financial life, every receipt I had saved, every bank statement, every paper that had any connection to money. And the more I looked, the more I found. I discovered that 3 years ago when Lawrence asked me to lend him my ID because he had lost his and needed to pick up an urgent package. He had done something else with it. He had opened an electricity service account in my name at an address that wasn't mine at his house. For 3 years, the electricity account for Lawrence's house had been in my name. And when he didn't pay on time, the penalties were accumulating on my credit history. That's why I had been denied a small loan last year when my car needed urgent repairs. That's why my credit score had mysteriously gone down. I called the electricity company. I explained that the account wasn't mine, that I had never lived at that address. The woman on the phone told me I needed to file a sworn statement, that I had to report this as identity fraud. Identity fraud committed by my own son. I hung up the phone and stared at the wall for I don't know how long, trying to process how I had gotten to this point, trying to understand at what moment my son had become this. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stayed awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the city outside. And I thought about all the times I had justified his behavior. All the times I had told myself that he was busy, that he had his own life, that I was being demanding by expecting more from him. But this wasn't about expectations. This was about theft, about deception, about a son who saw his mother as a source of resources that he could exploit without consequences. The next morning, I did something I had never done. I went to see a lawyer. It was a small office in the city center. The sign said William Sanchez, attorney at law. I had seen an ad in the newspaper that offered free consultations. I went in feeling small, feeling ridiculous, a 62-year-old woman coming to complain about her own son. But the receptionist smiled kindly and showed me in. Attorney Sanchez was a man in his 50s with graying hair at his temples and kind eyes. He asked me to tell him everything, and I did. I told him about the money that had disappeared, about the credit card I hadn't applied for, about the electricity account, about the papers that Lawrence wanted me to sign. He listened without interrupting. He took notes in a notebook, and when I finished, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "Mrs. Mendes," he said, "what you're describing to me is financial fraud and a breach of trust. If you sign those papers your son is asking you to, you're giving him total legal access to your money. He could empty it all out and you would have no legal recourse because you yourself gave him permission." The words fell on me like stones. I knew it. Deep down I knew it. But hearing it said out loud by a professional made it real in a different way. "What can I do?" I asked. He leaned forward. "First, don't sign anything. Second, you need to report the credit card fraud and the theft from your bank account. Third, you need to change all your passwords, your personal identification numbers, everything. Fourth, consider getting a restraining order if you feel you're in danger." A restraining order against my own son. The idea seemed absurd and devastating at the same time. "I don't want to get him in legal trouble," I told him. "He's my son." The lawyer looked at me with something that seemed like compassion and sadness. "Mrs. Mendes, your son is already in legal trouble. He's committed several felonies. The question isn't whether you want to get him in trouble. The question is whether you want to protect yourself." I left that office with a folder full of forms and a list of things I needed to do. I felt overwhelmed, but I also felt something else. I felt determined. I went straight to the bank. I changed all my passwords. I requested a new debit card. I closed the fraudulent credit card and filed a formal dispute. The teller at the bank helped me with everything. She treated me with patience without making me feel stupid or weak. When I got home that afternoon, I felt exhausted, but also strangely light, as if I had shed an invisible weight I had been carrying for years. That night, Lawrence finally called. His voice sounded tense on the phone. "Mom, we need to talk. Come over for dinner at my place tomorrow. We have to sort this out." It wasn't an invitation. It was a command. And before I would have obeyed without question. But now, after everything I had discovered, I only felt a cold calm. "I can't tomorrow," I told him. "I'm busy." "Busy? Mom, what can you be busy with? This is important for you." "Maybe," I said. "For me, there are other more important things." Now, there was a silence on the other end of the line. A silence heavy with surprise and irritation. "You're acting very weird, Mom. I don't know what's wrong with you, but you need to stop being so stubborn and sign those papers. This is for your own good." For my own good. Those words again. As if stealing from me were an act of love. Lawrence, I said with a voice that came out firmer than I expected. I'm not going to sign anything, and I think we need to have a very serious conversation about several things. About what things? He asked. His voice sounded different now, more alert, more cautious. About money that has left my account without my permission, about credit cards that I didn't apply for, about utility accounts in my name at addresses where I don't live. The silence that followed was absolute, so thick I could almost feel it through the phone. I don't know what you're talking about, he finally said. His voice sounded controlled, but I could detect the panic underneath. I think you do, I told him. And I think you need to think very carefully about what you're going to say next. Mom, you're delusional. You're confused. Maybe you need to see a doctor. There it was. The card I knew he would play. The card to make me seem senile, confused, incapable. I'm not confused, Lawrence. I have all the papers. I have all the proof. And I've already spoken with a lawyer. Another silence. This one longer, heavier. You spoke with a lawyer. His voice was almost a whisper now. Almost a threat. Yes. And he explained exactly what you've been doing. He explained what fraud is, what's illegal. Mom, you can't be serious. I'm your son. Everything I've done has been to help you. Help me, Lawrence. You stole from me for years. You used me. You lied to me. I would never, he began to say, but I interrupted him. Yes, you did. And you know it. The question now is, what are we going to do about it? I heard his breathing on the other end of the line, heavy, agitated. I'm coming over, he said. We need to talk in person. No, I told him. You are not coming over. If you want to talk, we can do it on the phone or we can do it with lawyers present. You're crazy. He yelled. Then completely crazy. After everything I've done for you, after all the times I've come to see you that I've worried about you. All the times you came to eat for free. You mean all the times you needed something from me? But the times I needed you, where were you? I hung up then before he could respond, before he could manipulate me with words again. And I stayed there, sitting in my kitchen with the phone in my hand, trembling, but not with fear, with rage, with years and years of suppressed rage that was finally finding its voice. That night, I slept better than I had in months because I had finally told the truth. I had finally stood my ground. And although I didn't know what would come next, I knew that I was no longer going to be the silent mother who allowed herself to be trampled on. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. It was as if a thick fog had lifted from my mind, and now I could see everything with an almost painful sharpness. I knew what I had to do. I knew I couldn't stop now. After breakfast, I grabbed my purse and left the house. I had a mental list of all the places I needed to visit, all the loose ends, Chidishi, I needed to tie up. If Lawrence thought I was a confused and helpless old woman, he was about to discover how wrong he was. My first stop was the main bank where I had my savings account. Not the checking account where I received my paycheck, but the other one. The one I had opened 30 years ago when I still had dreams of buying my own house someday. I had $7,200 saved. It wasn't a lot after a lifetime of work, but it was mine. I asked the manager to close that account. She asked me if I was sure if there was a problem. I told her that I just wanted to make some changes. She gave me the money in a cashier's check and recommended that I open an account at another bank for greater security. I followed her advice. I went to a different bank, one on the other side of town, one where Lawrence had never gone with me. I opened a new account, an account that only I knew about, an account where he could never find my money. Then I went to the electricity company. I filed all the documents that Attorney Sanchez had helped me prepare, the sworn statement, the copy of my ID, the proof that I had never lived at the address where that account was registered. The woman who helped me reviewed everything and told me they would start an investigation, that the account would be transferred to the correct name or closed, that I would no longer be responsible. I felt as if an invisible chain had been removed from my shoulders. My next stop was the credit bureau. I requested a full report of my history. I wanted to see everything. I wanted to know if there were more things that Lawrence had done behind my back. The employee gave me a thick document. I sat in the waiting room and read it page by page. There was something else that I didn't know about. A personal loan of $5,000 taken out 2 years ago in my name. A loan that had never been fully paid and was now in collections. $5,000. I felt the rage rise in my throat again like bile. I marked every fraudulent item with a marker. I filled out the dispute forms one by one with clear, firm handwriting. When I left that office, it was almost 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I hadn't eaten anything since breakfast, but I wasn't hungry. I had something stronger than hunger. I had purpose. I then went to my neighbor's house, Mrs. Alice Morrison. She was 70 years old and had lived in the building since before I did. We had been friends for decades, although in recent years we had drifted apart a bit. I had been so focused on Lawrence, so consumed with trying to maintain that relationship that I had neglected other connections. I knocked on her door. She opened it with surprise on her face. "Patricia, what a surprise. Come in. Come in." We went into her living room. She offered me coffee and I accepted. We sat down and she looked at me with those wise eyes that had seen a lot in life. "You look different," she said. "I don't know what it is, but there's something different about you." And then I told her everything. I told her about Lawrence, about the money, about the betrayal, about everything I had discovered. I talked for almost an hour without stopping. And she listened without interrupting, nodding from time to time with an expression that mixed sadness and something that looked like recognition. When I finished, she sighed deeply. "Patricia, I knew something wasn't right. I saw it every Friday when he came over, the way he treated you, like you were a service. But I didn't say anything because it wasn't my place. But I'm glad you're finally seeing the truth." She took my hand. Then her fingers were cold, but her grip was firm. "I need to ask you a favor." I told her, "I need you to be my witness. I need that if Lawrence comes and tries to say that I'm confused, that I'm senile, you can confirm that that's not the case, that I am in full control of my faculties." She nodded without hesitation. "Of course. And more than that, if you need a place to stay, if at any time you don't feel safe in your house, my door is open." Those words filled me with a gratitude so deep that it almost made me cry. But I didn't cry. I had cried enough. Now it was time to act. That night, back in my house, I organized all the documents I had collected. I put them in a large folder. I made copies of everything. I put the originals in a safe place and left the copies in the folder. If anything happened to me, if Lawrence tried to do something, there would be evidence. There would be proof. I also wrote a letter detailing everything I had discovered, everything that Lawrence had done. I put it in a sealed envelope with instructions that it was to be opened only in case of an emergency. I gave it to Mrs. Alice to keep. I was preparing myself like a general preparing for battle, because I knew that Lawrence wasn't going to let this go. I knew he would come, that he would try to manipulate me, to convince me, to make me doubt myself. But I was no longer the same woman I had been 2 weeks ago. That woman had died the night Lawrence threatened me in my own kitchen. The woman I was now was different. She was stronger, more clear, more determined. On Wednesday afternoon, as I was making tea, I heard a car stop in front of my building. I looked out the window and saw Lawrence's car. He got out with his wife. They looked determined. They were coming to confront me. I took a deep breath. I put down my teacup and I waited.